Welcome to the Oklahoma History Conference 2021. This presentation is Uncovering Oral History Perspectives in Oklahoma. I'm Karen Neurohr. I do research and outreach for the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program at the OSU Library, and my co-presenter is Mallory Covington, Archival Collections Manager for the Research Center of the Oklahoma History Center. At this time, we will introduce each other.
Dr. Karen Neurohr is a professor in the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program at the Oklahoma State University Library. She's the outreach lead for ListenOK, an initiative to create and maintain an inventory of oral histories held in repositories throughout Oklahoma. Her oral history work also includes developing the Wilma Elizabeth McDaniel Poet and Oklahoma Dust Bowl Immigrant Oral History Project, and co-developing the O State Stories and Spotlighting Oklahoma projects. She holds a doctorate in higher education from OSU and an MLS from the University of North Texas. In 2020, she participated in the virtual Advanced Oral History Summer Institute from the Oral History Center by the University of California at Berkeley. Dr. Neurohr has extensive experience with community education and outreach.
Thank you, Mallory. Mallory Covington attended the University of Central Oklahoma, where she graduated in 2010 with an MA in Museum Studies. She started with the Oklahoma Historical Society in 2011, working on the newspaper digitization project for the Gateway to Oklahoma History and cataloging oral history. During that time, she also worked in photos, maps, registration, and cataloging film and video. In 2013, she moved to the manuscripts department, and in 2017, she became a certified archivist. In 2019, she became the Archival Collections Manager. Okay, Mallory, go ahead and start yours.
Okay, so today I'm going to be talking to you about our project that we're doing to inventory all of our oral history collections. Up until now, they've kind of been unprocessed and uncatalogued. So let's kind of give you a brief overview of the OHS collection. It contains interviews from 1956 right up into the 2000s. It contains things like radio shows, American Indian music, church programs, and school choir music. The collection of interviews from 1956 was donated to the OHS by the principal of Ardmore High School. The collection contains interviews done by students of the pioneers of Ardmore. And the OHS collection is an amalgamation of all the oral histories that were done by employees of people from around the state and events that were recorded. And the Living Legends collection is a combination of the efforts of Oklahoma Christian University and the OHS to record radio programs, interviews, music, and speeches by both famous and everyday Oklahomans. So when I took over in 2019, this is kind of where we started at. It looked like at one point there had been a project to do an inventory of the collections, but matching the items with the inventory or even the collection was not always easy. Some of the collections were matched with accession numbers that were incorrect and collections that had been separated. The biggest question that we had and we wanted answered was, what exactly do we have in the collections? So we do have files that go along with a lot of the OHS and Living Legend collection, and these contain synopsises, interviewee and interviewer information. Sometimes we had transcripts or things that had been donated, like articles, photographs, newspaper clippings. And these played a vital role in updating and helping us update and untangling the collections, especially when it came to the Living Legends. So our Living Legends collection had been put on the catalog, but there were duplicate records made for interviewee and interviewers, or if there was an event, a record was made for the event, and then records were made for each of the interviewees. So we were working to combine these and figure out which records were needed for just the interviews themselves. And the OHS collection was in pretty decent shape on the catalog, but the gaps start to appear in the late 1990s and the 2000s where there are several interviews missing. So here's an example of one of the later interviews. You can see that it starts at 2000.004. So we're kind of wondering where's 1 through 3. And then you can see that the metadata that's put in here is kind of strange. There's only a description that's done in kind of a weird format that doesn't match any of the other interviews on the catalog. And then, so when it came to the Living Legends collection, we actually deleted and redid the entire Living Legends because it just made more sense that we could do it accurately that way. So when we started our inventory process, we started with the OHS collection because it's the one that's most available and most used by the public. So we started by separating out published and copyrighted materials to send to the library because we weren't able to use those or sell them to patrons if they wanted to use them. So it made more sense to put them in a reference only situation. And then this is kind of where we started uncovering what we had in the collection. We decided that we needed to start digitizing the Living Legends as they're reel-to-reels and they're degrading fairly quickly and they maybe weren't in the greatest shape. So some of the digitization had been done, but it was kind of hit or miss, and sometimes only one interview from the reel had been digitized. So we started a concerted effort to digitize the whole collection. And in the process of this, we have discovered recordings that were not listed on the box or on the catalog. So we've been kind of uncovering some new interviews as we go along. And then also in the process of this, we've put all of the formats together. So if a interview has a reel-to-reel, a cassette, a VHS, a DVD, we put all of those together where formerly they had been separated. So we had to kind of go to different drawers trying to figure out where each piece was. So this is kind of an example of the spreadsheet that we've been using to do our kind of overall inventory. This is an overview of all the collections that we have, and you can see that they tell you what the collection name is, what the collection number is, where it is, and if we've done a complete inventory of it. So our full-time oral history staff member has marked what collections he's completed. And in addition to this, the item level inventories are individual sheets for access. So this is an example of the individual collection spreadsheet. We use the descriptions that are on the outside of the containers as the description. And if they don't have a description on them, we just leave it blank or write unmarked. And the biggest problem is a lot of these don't have dates. But hopefully, if they don't have descriptions on them, it's a volunteer or intern project that later on we can have somebody listen to them and fill out the spreadsheet so that we know what's on them. So the other part of all of this is kind of keeping track of what has been digitized. Because up till now, we've been digitizing on a patron order basis. There was kind of hit or miss as to what had been digitized, and sometimes items were digitized multiple times because we didn't know if they had been digitized or not. And because we don't have a network drive where we can go and look and see what's been digitized, this seemed like the easiest way that we could keep track of it, and so everybody could access it and see what had been digitized, what had been put up on YouTube, and if the record was on the catalog. So this is the paperwork that I mentioned earlier. A lot of times there's the synopsis or the transcripts, which will be added to our catalog as soon as we finish editing all the metadata. And these are really helpful because then people will know, do I actually want to listen to this interview? Or, is this something maybe I can skip? So these have been extremely helpful. So the other problem that we had was physical access. So the problem with the collection is that the drawers only had collection numbers with no names, and the items inside were loose, sometimes with a note that said what collection they belonged to. but the collection numbers were not always correct or had no items in the drawers. So there was nothing to stop the collections from getting mixed up together. The other problem is that the drawers go up all the way almost to the ceiling. And for people on the shorter side, like myself, it's very difficult to try and pull the items when there's not always a ladder in there. And so we have kind of solved that problem by using open shelves for boxes on the top and then making it so that people of my size can look in the drawers to see what's there without having to go hunt down a ladder or stool. So these are just kind of examples of our unprocessed collections. Sometimes we have no idea where they came from or what they go to. There isn't any paperwork that's inside the boxes. So we've been trying to kind of do some detective work to try and figure out where these should go. And so, and then the other picture shows a picture of the drawer where you have a bunch of items with a little sticky note on top. But if for some reason the drawer should get jostled, it would get mixed up with the collection next to it. And it'd be really hard to tell what went with what collection. So the other thing that we've been working on is our preservation issue. So there's a lot of tapes and even sometimes cassette, VHS tapes and things that are just loose in the drawer without any covers. So we have been working on placing them into acid-free containers for protection. But the other thing that this problem that this causes is that there's going to be more space with you're going to have to use more space with the cassette tapes. So that's something we have to take into consideration. So when it comes to the audio on the catalog, a lot of them, only parts of it were put on the collection, if any at all. And then the metadata is inconsistent throughout. So like, for example, here, the collection starts at tape 50, and then it goes to 61. And you can see that the metadata is inconsistent between the two. One has a description, and then the other one has a bunch of other information. So we're trying to work on getting a standardized way of inputting metadata so that it's easier for people to find stuff on the catalog. So the other thing that we're working on is increasing access to the collection. So we have been adding all of our already digitized recordings to the YouTube channel because we figure that's a really great way to get things out to the public and out to a wider audience, as our catalog is not Google searchable. And we also have put a hard drive in our audio listening room so that patrons who come in can go listen on the hard drive if the stuff's not on YouTube yet. And we did write an article for the OHS Extra about the YouTube channel to try and help get our membership involved in listening to that. So these are some examples of our YouTube channel. We do add stuff every month. I try to upload around 60 videos every month. And things are divided up into different playlists based on topics. So we've got mines and mining, we've got World War I, World War II, we've got African American, Native American interviews, pioneer interviews. And then we also, if we have a whole collection, we put those into their own playlists. So we've got like the Tulsa Race Massacre interviews are on there in their own collection. And then we have the North Tulsa Oral History Project is in its own collection. So you can go and look at the collections in their entirety, or you can go look at a topic. So the other thing that we're doing is creating oral history guides so that people can go to our website and they can download these guides on specific topics and look at the different interviews that we have for these topics. Like this is an example of our Germans from Russia oral history interviews. So it may not be every single interview that we have, but it'll be a good chunk, and you'll be able to use this as kind of a starting guide as to what interviews we do have. So these are kind of some of the collections that we've discovered as we're going on through our our interview process. So we did find the series of interviews that were done by the original Tulsa Race Riot Commission by Eddie Faye Gates. They weren't on the catalog and they weren't available to the public. But as of now, we've digitized them and made them available. And they're actually some of our most watched interviews, and they've been used on several documentaries and things for, especially for the upcoming anniversary. And then some other interesting ones we found was Jerry Elliott, and he worked for NASA, and so a lot of these are NASA recordings. And then we also found all the interviews from when they did the Crossroads of Commerce exhibit. So those are some neat ones. And then another one that's been really interesting is the Oklahoma Arts Council collection. It's interviews done with artists and musicians all over the state, and it's Native American, and there's also some an individual discussing Mexican music, and there's Japanese kimono makers. So it's really diverse and it's very, very interesting. So we have been contributing to ListenOK. So we've contributed several collections. I think it stands at about 14 at the moment. And a couple of them are ongoing projects that will be added to as we add more items to our catalog, such as the Living Legends. We've done the first 499 reels, but there's about 500 more to go. So I'm really excited about this. Our oral history collection has been up to this point been underused, and I have been struggling to find a way that we can get the collections out to the public. And this will be a great way to share with other institutions, as well as making collections available to the public in another way besides our catalog and YouTube. So our takeaways from this project is that inventory and processing takes time. We've been doing this for 2 years and we've still got quite a ways to go. And once this inventory process is done, we'll be able to see the holes that we have in our collections. And hopefully we'll be able to direct our collecting efforts towards those holes. We can also see what collections are degrading and need to be digitized. And as we inventory, we're able to determine if there are collections that maybe no longer meet our mission or scope of collecting. So maybe we can find either new homes for those collections or they can be deaccessioned. And as a result of the inventory and collaboration with other departments, an events collection has been made for items that don't really fit into the film and video collection, but aren't really interviews or audio. An example of this recording is the Canterbury Society concert that was held at the History Center. We've also created a reference collection for items that have copyright restrictions, but are a valuable resource for researchers. So where do we go from here? Well, we'll continue to inventory our collection, and we'll start putting stuff on the catalog and getting it out there. And then we're going to work on digitizing for preservation first. And then we'll start looking for gaps in our collection. I think that's all I've got. Thank you.
Thank you, Mallory. That is a lot of work indeed. Okay, so we'll move into my presentation here. So the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program was founded in 2007 as part of the Oklahoma State University Library, and it has the goal of documenting and making accessible the history of OSU and Oklahoma through oral history interviews. We are also an arm of the OSU Center for Oklahoma Studies. In written versions of history, the contributions and perspectives of many individuals and groups are left undocumented, and details and nuances are often excluded from the record. The methodology of oral history allows researchers to fill some of the gaps by interviewing individuals about their firsthand experiences and then making that material available to researchers and the general public. By educating students, faculty, and community members in the methods and ethical standards of oral history, the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program promotes the collection, preservation, and analysis of interview-based research. So at a basic level, the oral history life cycle stages are the idea, the plan, the interview, preservation and archiving, and access and use. Oral history collections exist throughout Oklahoma in local museums, heritage centers, county historical societies, and public and academic libraries. Existing oral history collections, which may date back more than 50 years, pose concerns for preservation and access. ListenOK is one way that is helping oral history interviews be found so they can be used. So ListenOK is a new statewide guide to oral history collections throughout Oklahoma. It was developed by a team at the OSU Library, and this guide identifies and describes thousands of oral history interviews and their locations. It provides a centralized searching point for these unique collections. ListenOK offers researchers and the general public information about Oklahoma's rich culture and history through the voices of those who lived it. We launched ListenOK in 2020, and we are proud to note that the Oklahoma Historical Society was our very first partner. ListenOK is intended to complement, not replace, a repository's catalog. Working collaboratively with partner institutions, we bring together inventories and descriptive metadata held by repositories throughout Oklahoma. Only a few other states have a statewide guide to oral histories. Kentucky started one in 1991 and began offering it online in 2001. Michigan started a statewide guide in 2006 and is in the process of upgrading it. Wyoming started theirs in 2017, and Texas is in the early stages of developing one. Sarah Milligan, the department head for the Oral History Research Program at OSU, came to OSU with experience with Kentucky's Pass the Word and was instrumental in the design of ListenOK. Two colleagues in the OSU Library's Digital Resources and Discovery Services Department developed the technical side of ListenOK, and the Oral History Digital Archivist contributed as well. My job is to coordinate the outreach, receive and format the inventories, and add them to the guide. Here is an overall look at the process that we use for ListenOK. And here is another way to look at it. I utilize Microsoft Excel files, format them, put the information through an in-house validation tool, which creates a CSV file, copy that CSV file into MODEX, a content management system platform, and then I check the entries in the online guide. There are 5 metadata categories for oral histories. The metadata and description include specific fields of collected information which help place oral history interviews in context and enable the discovery and access in a variety of ways. Administrative metadata is typically external to the content of the interview. This metadata includes details about acquisition and provenance, the holding institution, and project documentation. This metadata is necessary to manage and use the interviews. Descriptive metadata documents the content and the context of the resource. Descriptive metadata includes the name of the interviewer and interviewee, the date and place of the interview, and content information in the form of keywords, summary, and controlled vocabulary. Descriptive metadata is information necessary for the discovery of oral history interviews. Technical metadata is information that includes all the physical and technical properties of the resource, including size, format, compression, and date stamps for recording. It may also include origin data such as the recording device and the settings used. Preservation metadata is information that is used to evaluate and protect a resource from harm, injury, deterioration, or destruction. For both analog and digital resources, practitioners should document the condition, creation of derivative copies, and any preservation events. Finally, rights and access metadata consists of information that documents legal and/or verbal agreements, copyright, licenses, restrictions, and any other information that guides future use. Mallory did a great job of describing how they're doing the inventory, and they're working with all of these metadata categories in various ways. And while all the categories are important for oral histories, ListenOK focuses on administrative and descriptive metadata. Here is an example of some spreadsheet columns from the Living Legends collection of the Oklahoma Historical Society that Mallory provided for me. These have been reformatted for our use here. The left column shows the name of the person who did the interview. As you can see, sometimes the repository didn't know the interviewer's name. Next is the name of the person who was interviewed. Notice the third name on this list, Mrs. Hoffsummer. Her given name is not listed either here or over in the description. This is a source of frustration for me and Mallory with some older interviews like this. In some cases, if we have the spouse's given name, we can do some research and try to determine the woman's given name. Next column is the date of the interview. Unfortunately, as Mallory noted, not all of the records include the date. Next are controlled vocabulary subjects, which are talked about in the interview. Then next is a description of the interview, which sometimes includes biographical information. Ultimately, we hope that ListenOK will provide people with enough information that they can use to follow up with the repository for access to the interview. ListenOK offers searching by collections, institutions, and by people. In the people search, we include the names of the interviewer and the interview. Here is an example of a people search in ListenOK of the late Clem McSpadden, the famous rodeo announcer, Oklahoma legislator, rancher, and alumnus of OSU. Currently, ListenOK shows 3 interviews with Clem on 3 different dates and in 3 different collections. And it was my honor to do the interview with Clem for the O State Stories project. He was a founding member of the rodeo team at OSU. You can see how this would make things easier for researchers to know what interviews exist, when they were done, and where they can be found. Here is another search in ListenOK. A search of the word Cherokee yielded 38 results, and here are 4 of them. Notice the variety of these results. We have Cherokee artists, we have the Cherokee Strip Regional Heritage Center, and we have Joe Thornton, who is a graduate of the Chilocco Indian Agricultural School, who's identified as Cherokee. As Mallory talked about before, the Living Legends, I'm currently working with her on the Living Legends collection of the Oklahoma Historical Society, and it is the largest collection I have encountered thus far. Except for the very largest institutions, it seems to be more common for oral history collections in Oklahoma's museums and libraries to have 50 or fewer interviews per collection. Mallory provided this wonderful description of what is contained in the collection, where the collection was acquired from, and details about how many interviews are there and what is in total in the collection. And then we've added a note that the people and interviews listed here are a work in progress and many more will be added. Here is an example of what ListenOK shows for some of the interviews in the collection. These are all from the 1960s, but as you can see, the date was not recorded for one of them. So as best as they can at the Oklahoma Historical Society and Mallory, they're trying to fill in these gaps and missing pieces of information on these. A people search in ListenOK for Angie DeBow found this record in the Myra Trainer collection at the Oklahoma Historical Society. This was especially interesting to me because we have interviews of Angie DeBow at the OSU library. We'll be adding these soon to ListenOK, so then you'll be able to see that there are interviews in at least two different repositories of the Oklahoma's greatest historian, Angie DeBow. When the user clicks on the green button, Visit the Collection, it takes them to the website. The user can then learn more about the institution and its collections and see how to contact them for access and use. ListenOK is not providing direct access to the interviews and the recordings. We're simply a guide to the inventories of these interviews. This shows what we have in ListenOK to date, and out of the 51 collections, 30 of them are our own collections here at the OSU Library. Our partner list will be growing this year as we receive more inventories from museums and libraries. These are currently the groups that we are partnering with, and I expect to be receiving even more inventories from several different collections, several different repositories who I know are working on their inventories. In some cases, ListenOK has sparked interest by museums to actually start by creating an inventory of what they have, some of the smaller sites in particular. So ListenOK is helping OSU bridge partnerships in new ways as we meet our institutional mission of service. Because of ListenOK, two small rural museums have sought assistance for their collections. The Bristow Historical Society and Museum sought assistance for a legacy collection they have. Sarah Milligan and I visited their museum for consultation, and then they came and visited our department to speak with Patrick DeGlaris, our digital archivist, to see how he manages the technical aspects. Bristow was able to secure grant funding to purchase equipment and hire someone to digitize their collection. They have also been inspired to embark on a new oral history project for their community since the interviews they currently have were done several decades ago. We like to help promote opportunities such as the Oklahoma Heritage Preservation Grant, which is offered through the Oklahoma Historical Society to sites that need funding. Okay, we see a number of benefits of having a statewide guide, and this is a list of benefits for users. Had I known about the other Clem McSpadden interviews, I certainly would have read them before I did my interview with him, so I could see what was already in the historical record, and maybe if I needed to take a different approach to questions that I was asking. We also see a number of benefits of having a statewide guide for repositories or institutions that have these oral history collections. And this is a list of those benefits. In one case, one of the institutions that we're working with relayed that some of their stakeholders who were helping fund the work that they're doing really appreciated the fact that ListenOK was another way that people could find what was in their collections. So now we get to how to participate in ListenOK. Well, the first step is to create an inventory. The basic level that we really need and that is required would be the institution name and a URL, the name of the collection, and the name of the interviewee. We prefer to have this information as well: the name of the interviewer, the date of the interview, the subjects and keywords, a short description for the interview and the collection, and a collection level URL for online interviews. But of course, as you have already seen, we don't always have that information available, so we just have to use what we are given to put into ListenOK. Once this information is collected and gathered, then the inventory list can be sent to us for ListenOK. So we see a lot of opportunities here. We will continue to invite museums and libraries to participate, provide guidance, receive and assess inventories, format those inventories, and add them to ListenOK. Possibilities for enhancing avenues of communication about oral history in Oklahoma are broad. COVID affected our plans last year to disseminate information about ListenOK face-to-face at statewide conferences and meetings. We're trying to get the word out about ListenOK so we can add more partners and oral history collections to the guide. We also are available for consultation for legacy interviews or for creating new oral history projects. We appreciate the opportunity from the Oklahoma Historical Society to share information about ListenOK for this presentation. We look forward to building new partnerships throughout Oklahoma. Please feel free to contact me if you have questions about how the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program can help you, or if you would like to participate. Thank you. Okay, Mallory, we still have a little time left, so a couple of questions occurred to me during your presentation. What would you say is your biggest challenge? I think you're muted.
So our biggest challenge so far has just been the amount of stuff that we have that is just in boxes and that we just have to kind of get through to do item level, because some of our collections just have hundreds and hundreds of cassette tapes and things. So it's just been a big challenge to kind of, find a starting point and kind of jump in and not be like overwhelmed.
What advice would you give to small museums that have oral history collections?
Um, my advice would be to make an inventory. Use Excel. Excel is great. You don't have to have some fancy, cataloging program. Excel is a great starting point, and to know what you have is the very first step, because then you can take it from there and decide, you know, do we want to preserve these? How are we going to use them? Things like that. But starting with what you know or what you have and is the very first part of starting any kind of oral history program. Even if you want to continue on with new projects, you got to know what you have before you can go on with new stuff.
Okay, could you talk a minute? I think you mentioned having interns for some of the work there. So are there opportunities at the Oklahoma Historical Society for interns or for volunteers with the work that you are doing?
Yeah, we take interns every semester, and interns can work at the building, or they can work remotely if they're out of town, or if they just feel more comfortable that way. And also we have a pretty good volunteer program, and we're kind of always taking new volunteers. And I've got bazillions of oral histories that need to be listened to and transcribed and things. So, if people have interest in that, I'm always willing to have extra help.
Okay, I'm glad you brought up transcription because that is certainly an element of oral history work that I have used a lot. And I think people sometimes don't understand what that means to transcribe an interview. But in our department, we use the program Express Scribe for transcribing, and we can slow the recording way down. And then we're typing the words as we're listening to the recording. We can stop or pause. We can go back and forth. And it can take a good 10 hours to transcribe a 1 hour interview. And then after that interview is transcribed, we run an audit check on it. We have somebody listen to it and make sure that the transcriber was recording the information accurately. And then we have someone who cleans up these transcriptions before we put them online and send them out. We also send the transcription to the interviewee so that they can read over it and make corrections that they feel need to be made. And then after they send that back to us, we do end up putting it online. It's not a quick process. It can take 1 year or longer to put the interviews online with all of the different steps that they go through. Okay, did anything come to your mind during my presentation that you wanted to ask about?
Well, I wondered if there was any plans in the future ever to link to digitized interviews that have been put up there.
Well, we did talk about that when we were developing ListenOK, but when we're thinking about this from a long-term perspective, we think that might be a little unwieldy for us to manage in case those links change on down the road or something is taken down, and just the constant communication of making sure that everything is working and up to date and that it's moved over accurately. We have decided not to do that at this time. That's something that we could do later on should we decide that we want to move in that direction. But for now, we're just mainly interested in showing people what interviews are throughout Oklahoma in these different locations, and then have them work with the repository or the institution like you all to actually be able to access and use the interviews.
Okay. The other question that came to mind is kind of what started all of ListenOK? Like, where did the idea come from?
Well, our department, our oral history research department, is really fairly new at the OSU library. It just started in 2007, but our dean, I think, and the previous department head, who's now an associate dean, were certainly aware of Kentucky's Pass the Word guide. And so I think that that is where the idea came from, to have a statewide guide and seeing the value in that. And then we were fortunate to be able to hire Sarah Milligan, who is originally from Oklahoma. She grew up down near McAllister, and she went to college here for her bachelor's degree. And she had experience with Kentucky's statewide guide, Pass the Word. So I guess you could say the stars all aligned in a good direction when we were able to hire Sarah, and she had experience with that and knew what we needed to do to get it going. We also have very talented people in the department who could develop the technical side of it. Now, it could have been outsourced, and we could have hired somebody to develop the website for us and everything. But I think the estimate was that that would have cost $10,000 to $15,000. So we had a developer who did all of the work and has been able to make it happen. I will say it's been quite a learning curve for me. This was not at all in my skill set, this type of work. And so I've really enjoyed having the opportunity to learn some new skills and to be able to figure out how this works, putting together a guide that can be followed step by step in case other people are helping later on with putting the interviews in the collection, and just understanding it. I'm still learning as I go. I'm probably a little slower than I will be eventually, but it's so fun to receive these inventories and see what interviews are out there, and think about what went into collecting those interviews. And if I could change one thing, it would just be having, and I'm sure you would say the same thing, but having more metadata with the interviews would be ideal. And I feel like with interviews that people are doing now, that maybe they have a better understanding of the importance of that. At least I hope they do, and being able to follow the guidelines and standards. The Oral History Association website has great practical information that's freely available online about how to do oral histories and about the guidelines that need to be followed. And so if anyone who's watching this presentation is interested in embarking on this, I would refer them to the Oral History Association website, and to gain some understanding about the different elements that go into oral history work and what is needed. Okay, I think we're close to the end of the time that we had been allotted for our presentation. And so do you have any last words for everyone?
Oh, well, thank you for joining us in this presentation. And I'm also always happy to answer questions about legacy things or inventorying or cataloging metadata. So my email is on the OHS website and you can find me there.
Okay, and thank you everyone. We are glad that you watched our presentation today.